so much for joining us for another session of Coffee Candidates in Conversation. We are bringing this series to you as voters because we understand how important it is for voters to have as much information as possible about candidates. Why is that important? Well, we want you to make good decisions at the polls. Well, great decisions at the polls. So today we have with us a special guest, and I'm assuming that many of you have already gotten to know her. Her name is Miss Ruby Powell-Dennis, and she is running for state representative for District 97. So good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me, Mike. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. Of course, it's Coffee Candidates in Conversation. So do you have your mug ready to go? You fired up and ready to go with it? Okay.
I do.
Nice. Well, I understand how busy this time is for candidates, and so I'm going to jump right in and get by the getting this good. I know you got to get to the polls. So let's start with this question. Can you tell us something about Miss Ruby Powell-Dennis that we cannot find by searching you on Google, that we wouldn't know from checking your campaign website, and that we couldn't learn from working with you in your professional capacity?
Certainly. So I'm proud to be one of 19 women in my immediate family. I'm the last of 5 girls. I have quite a few nieces, my daughter. And so I come from 3 generations of really strong, amazing college graduates and women who have been small business owners, have had successful small businesses, and who have been serving in our educational system in some capacity. I'm the 3rd generation educator in my family. My grandmother served in the classroom for almost 40 years. My mother served for 39. And it is my hope to catch them, if not surpass them, and be in service of students and families as well. So I'm very strong, but I get it honest.
Nice. I love that. Well, let's kind of dig in and go ahead and again get while the getting is good. Okay, so we know that as a candidate, well, when you become a candidate, your life essentially becomes the issues that matter most to your constituents. But there's a reality that we all sometimes forget as voters, and that is that you as a candidate are also a voter. So let's take your candidate hat off for a moment, set that to the side, and let's talk as a voter. What is the single most important issue to you as a voter, and why?
Yep. So it would be our educational system. I benefited from a great public school education. My mother was a public school teacher, so was my grandmother. And I think a lot about when I was, so in high school, I was an international baccalaureate student. And so I had an opportunity to take some of the most rigorous coursework in the world. I mean, because you have the same curriculum in the IB program around the world. And that's when I became just very aware of, even then, the disparities in our educational system, and can remember leaving my classes, going to teach my teammates, because I was a 3-sport athlete, and going to my teammates being like, listen, this is what I learned. Are y'all learning something similar in your classes? And they were like, no, they weren't hearing about the same types of academic opportunities as I was. And it was really hard because these were, folks that I cared about, people I went to middle school or junior high school with, and I just didn't see them getting the same opportunities. And for me, when I think about, our educational system now during a pandemic, I was a graduate student when Katrina hit. I also know how when there's, economic disruption or things happening in our broader community, we feel it in the educational system as students. And so that's on my heart and mind right now as a voter. And that is when I go in to push the button and vote, I'm also going to be voting, for leaders who are strong on education, because quite frankly, we need to keep our teachers, students, and families safe. And so supporting education and valuing our educational system is going to be an important part of that.
Okay. Well, I want to sort of peel a little bit more out of the this education discussion. I've seen countless videos about this. Betsy DeVos she talks about it. You've heard Donald Trump speak on it, and now you have political commentators talking about it, and teachers are upset to even hear it. So decreasing the threat of decreasing federal funding for school districts who choose to go all virtual as a response to COVID-19. What are your thoughts on that? And what do you see happening, or at least what do you see as the best response for our school system, you know, using your legislative or legislators' lens to evaluate how to handle it?
Yep. So teachers and school system leaders did not choose to have student funding tied to student attendance. And so because our school budgets are tied to, you know, daily attendance, I mean, to be quite honest, so my background is in schools and working on the national side with budgets. If you want to be super technical, we actually track, you know, quarter hour increments. So if a student doesn't show up to school all, you know, 8 hours or whatever of a day, the school gets docked for the hours that the student misses in the state system against their budget. And so right now, the way our schools are set up, it just doesn't match the reality of the world that we live in. And I'm sure that when folks are crafting our school formulas, that they had the best intentions at heart, but they were not thinking about what if there was a legitimate reason why thousands, hundreds of thousands of students across our country could not go to school. And so it all of a sudden makes that formula inadequate. So instead of penalizing adults for something that they had no control over, teachers didn't write the policies, school and system leaders didn't write that policy. It came from legislators decades ago. We need to begin to reimagine, well, now that we are in the midst of a pandemic that shows no signs of slowing down in the next couple of months, how do we then set our schools up to be successful, fiscally successful long term? So instead of punishing schools and threatening schools and teachers, which is what this actually is, people should be spending, particularly our president and our secretary of education, should be working with thought leaders across the country, state legislators across the country, to figure out how to untie school budgets from student attendance and instead tie it to metrics that we know schools and systems can live up to during a pandemic. So for example, instead of that, you know, look at how many schools are trying to procure technology, give them some credit and support and financial resources to do that, right? If you see how many schools are distributing lunches, because our nutritional services has to count every apple, every orange that goes out the door. Use something like that. How many meals are served in under-resourced communities? There are lots of metrics and data that we collect in our schools that tell us what is going on in our buildings. Instead, we should pivot to utilize one of those metrics instead of threatening school teachers, threatening school leaders, threatening system leaders, that if they don't, you know, deprioritize their own life and the health of their own families in service of others, you're making heroes and villains out of folks at a time where that's just not the appropriate approach and it's not thoughtful leadership.
Wonderful response. And you know, I wouldn't even ask you what you think about our Secretary of Education, even trying to inadequately speak on the topic. But let's sort of push on through then, because you tapped on something that I think that Shelby County Schools is making great strides toward. But we know that it's not just you know, Shelby County schools that's facing this. We have schools in general across Tennessee, schools districts in general that are facing this. So let's talk about digital equity, because you know the reality is we do not have a stronghold on you know, knocking down COVID-19. If anything, it has a stronghold on us. And so, I mean, what can we do? Do we have a plan in Tennessee that you know of to address digital equity? And if we don't, what would you propose?
Yep. At Shelby County, our county commissioners have been working hard the last several years. The 2021 fiscal budget that was just passed has some additional money in it so that we can continue our work to move toward providing free Wi-Fi and hotspots across our city and county. I mean, places like Denver, Philadelphia, they have it. If you're in the city, it may not be the fastest internet, but it is free and available. And so I think that, you know, we have lots of exemplars around the country where we've seen this happen. Our county commission and city council have been working on this. There's some infrastructure built, but again, it takes time. You know, there's no way in which you can just throw up infrastructure super fast, especially if you've seen, you know, other major capital improvements. It takes time. There's a process. You have to bid it out. There's some fiduciary responsibilities that come with that. And so we're on the path, but unfortunately, the timing is just not ideal. But again, it doesn't mean that we dial it back. It means that we continuously, work towards supporting our municipal leadership because they are doing everything that they can. At the state level, we have an obligation to begin to have a broader conversation around, well, what does Wi-Fi access across our state look like? If you are in a rural community, you may have to be on dial-up or some other very slow form of Wi-Fi. And quite frankly, it's not going to meet your needs if you're a parent who is trying to provide instructional support to your children at home. And so I say all that to say, as we look, one of the big slogans on my campaign is 21st century leadership for 21st century challenges. We knew that this challenge was coming. We have seen the proliferation of Silicon Valley, the influence of social media. We've seen how technology has changed our lives in ways that we never could have imagined. So this is not new. But again, if we want to make sure that every single person in our state is taken care of, then we have to start treating access like a the same in which the Tennessee Valley Authority, under the New Deal many decades ago, it stimulated economic development in rural communities. It brought permanent jobs to those communities and changed the lives of thousands of people up and down the Tennessee Valley because it stretches across several states. We need to be thinking that way about, infrastructure building in our state. It's, again, not just a Shelby County or a District 97 issue. Rather, we have reached a place in our country and in our state where we actually need to roll out bigger infrastructure projects. And so digital equity should be a part of that. Because, again, if we're going to be putting up cell phone towers, 5G and all of that, we need to be also thoughtful about our brothers and sisters in rural communities who have a need as well.
Okay. Well, look. Now we're about to go into our lightning round. I know lightning is really fast. We'll give you about a minute and a half on these questions. So we're going to go into the slow lightning round. And what I'll do is I'll pick an issue and just display it on the screen. And what I want you to do is dig in on it and tell us your thoughts. If there's an opportunity you see, talk about it. And we want to sort of keep the answers at about a minute and a half. And if you see one that's a high value target for you in terms of, where you really need to share some stuff, you let me know. And then we'll pause and dig in on that, based on how much time we have left. Fair enough?
Sounds good.
Okay. Let me see. What do we get? All righty. Question that a lot of people would love to hear an answer to. What is a livable wage?
Yep. So I'm going to go with $15 an hour. At the end of the day, our current minimum wage is less than $8 an hour. Inflation in our country is rising. We've been through a recession in 2008. We are in the midst of a recession, depending on who you ask now. And so we have to put people on a path towards $15. Stop.
Nice. And yeah, it's been a decade. And that is a long time to not have an increase. Let me pick.
A lot has changed. While you're pulling up the next question, a lot has changed. I mean, when you think about the cost of gas, the cost of food, the cost of milk and eggs, I mean, at the end of the day, you have to pay people so that people can live. When people don't have a livable wage, it impacts their ability to get to work on time. It impacts their ability to provide childcare for their family. It has lots of implications. So, at the end of the day, somebody is making money. We just want to make sure that the people who are serving us, who are on the front lines, who are working hard, that working families and hardworking Americans get the wages that they've earned.
All righty. Well, then let's keep digging in. Expansion of Medicare. We said no to $1.4 billion to help Tennesseans in our legislature at our House. Thoughts on that? And keeping that in mind, I want to throw this out to make it a little more saucy. Tennessee ranks as the 7th worst state in the nation for hypertension, and I believe so. It's hypertension. It is heart disease. We're the 5th worst for heart disease. I'm sorry, 7th worst for hypertension and heart disease. 5th worst for diabetes. We're the 3rd worst for stroke, and it costs the state of Tennessee $5 billion per year. Keeping that in mind, what are your thoughts?
Yep. So we need to accept of the big pushbacks that Republicans and our, the GOP is giving around why they haven't accepted it is because if federal aid support goes away, that the state cannot afford the cost of that expansion on its own. However, we're putting $527 million into our reserves in a rainy day fund. And so my question is always, if this is not a rainy day, then what is your definition of rainy day? Because again, we have the money that, we need to accept the Medicaid expansion while there's federal support for it. But also we can't just continue to put money in a rainy day fund and allow people to die on our watch as leaders. So the short answer to that is we need to accept the expansion, but also recognize that, we need to put money in reserves when we genuinely have a surplus, not when we are actually diminishing social services to tax-paying citizens in our state.
Right on, right on. Well, let's push on through. What about then this issue that is directly connected to the one that we chose before? And really even to this, and we talked about what is a livable wage. Then we talked about healthcare. This people who live in this class generally struggle with both poverty.
Right. So systemic poverty in our country is decades long of bad policy that blames people for being victims of poverty as though it is a choice. And so I think first and foremost, we have to write legislation that is understanding that if you simply under-resource a community or a particular zip code, I'll use one because District 97 is actually a more affluent district. So the median household income in our district is higher than it is for the city of Memphis. It's about $35,000 for the city of Memphis. And so when I think about how do we actually tackle and address poverty, it's about, okay, so if we're talking about a Green New Deal, for example, and we're talking about a light rail or jobs, to, increase and improve the efficiency of our public transportation system, then those jobs should go to communities like 38127 zip code, which has some of the highest infant mortality rates in our state, if not and in this part of the country. It also has, some of the highest foreclosure rates because it was hit very hard by the recession in 2008. And also it is a community that is, 50,000 people. So that is the equivalent of a small, if you think a college town. And so until we actually start to unpack and really target zip codes that historically are under-resourced, poverty is concentrated in communities across our county, then we can't actually address it. And again, it is about when we roll out progressive legislation that's going to bring millions of dollars of revenue into a community, we have to choose communities that are victims of poverty, that are stricken by poverty as anchors for these types of programs so that, again, it took decades to create the scenarios that we see now. It'll take us decades to undo that work. But again, you have to make substantial infrastructure commitments and put substantial projects that are going to be there permanently in those communities.
Okay. Well, let me toss this up because we're talking about change, but what about this fact? 72 Republicans and 27 Democrats. How do you plan to get things done?
So first, I believe that those numbers are going to change. I see progressives and Democrats running all over the state, challenging Republicans who previously had no challengers. They're viable candidates. They're raising money. They're getting the word out. And if their turnout looks anything like what we're seeing here in Shelby County, then I'm confident that we'll have more than 27 Democrats. So I'll say that first. Once we are all elected, then we'll start to file legislation that, again, does things like targets communities that historically have been underserved. We'll need to also lobby because I also believe of the Republicans who are up there serving, there are individuals who care deeply about kids. And so when it comes to changing the formula for student funding, to move to a weighted school funding, I'm going to work with champions who also care about having that, type of legislation passed. I believe that there are some issues like healthcare, because this legislative session alone, there were 2 Republicans who sponsored a bill to ideally put us on a path towards the Medicaid expansion. So I say all that to say, when you file lots of good legislation that doesn't get hung up in subcommittees, you're lobbying on both sides of the aisle, you do your research as a freshman legislator to find out, in the last couple of sessions, what types of legislation have your colleagues tried to pass? Who can you partner with to co-sponsor a bill? When you're doing that kind of work, then you can start to see systemic change. But I do believe that public opinion is on our side. I believe that, we are holding current leadership accountable. And by the time I take the oath of office, January 2021, we'll have far more Democrats than 27, and public opinion and lots of data on our side around the true impact of COVID-19. And if that is not enough to move those Republicans and to get them to pass legislation that works for all Tennesseans in the state, then we'll continue to make sure that we work with other Democrats to get them voted out.
All righty. I like that. I like that a lot. Well, let's talk about something that is happening across the country. And, it's the legalization of cannabis. We know that people who suffer with glaucoma, some with cataracts, and there are even studies that suggest that they're beneficial, after effects for cannabis treatment for even with children who have certain types of autism. So what do you think about that? And how do you reconcile the legalization, if you support it, with the fact that there are so many people who are incarcerated for drug charges involving possession of cannabis, or the other way that it's phrased is marijuana. But for purposes of this, what are your thoughts on that, and how do you reconcile the two?
Yep. So there's the whole narrative surrounding cannabis that has been longstanding. And so there's lots of emotions and feelings around that. My take on it is more around the business side of the legalization of cannabis. So when I looked at states like Florida and Colorado, Illinois, we can learn a lot from what went well and what didn't. So I'll go in a little bit of order to make sure I stay under time. So in Colorado, when they legalized cannabis, first for medicinal purposes and then recreational purposes, there were a lot of learnings. First, because they didn't fix their school funding formula. When the excess revenue rolled into their state's budgets, you still have school districts that are only operating 4 days a week before COVID-19 and didn't have money for bus transportation. So the first thing is that before you agree to the legalization of cannabis, you actually need to make sure that you don't have other policies on the books that when that additional surplus and revenue rolls in, we don't want it to go to a rainy day fund. I want to see that go directly to our educational system because it does not have the money that it needs. And so for me to feel confident about a piece of legislation, I want to know where is the money going once we do legalize it, whether it's for medicinal or recreational purposes. Because again, as I saw from Colorado, they have a surplus in their budget, but it is not going to the students and families that are in need. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is vertical integration. So in the state of Florida, when they passed their legalization of cannabis legislation, they required that you had to have vertical integration. That means in order to procure a cannabis license, you had to own every part of the supply chain, from the seeds to the sale. And so when you think about that, for African Americans or individuals or from marginalized communities who don't have the financial capital to get into the business, there's no way you could purchase a cannabis license in the state of Florida for a whopping $55 million. That's right. That's what it costs to procure. There are 2 licenses right now for sale for $95 million combined in the state of Florida. But again, if you cannot prove vertical integration, you legally cannot procure that license. So that's also a part of it. We can't have a vertical integration requirement because then you basically guarantee that the consolidation of corporate entities in the cannabis industry are the only ones who will be able to operate. The other part of that is we have too many banking regulatory pieces so that even if you and I said we wanted to get into the industry, banks already are hesitant to loan to African Americans who are starting businesses, who are seeking entrepreneurship. So until we look at banking regulations, there is no place for folks to legally put their money. So again, if you are a supplier selling, say, plastic wrap to cannabis, to a cannabis business, your bank account can be frozen, even though all you sell is plastic wrap. But if one of your vendors is a cannabis vendor, that can actually create problems for you. So there's as you start to look at second and third tier vendors to this industry, they're going to have some issues if they can't get the banking regulatory pieces solved. The final portion of it is the expungement. When you think about individuals who have been incarcerated over the last several decades for the possession of cannabis in whatever form intend to distribute, So to use Florida as an example, they passed Amendment 4 so that individuals who've been convicted of felonies got the right to vote, but then essentially put a poll tax on it. So, I say all that to say, I want to see legislation in the state of Tennessee that addresses all of those issues and includes social equity programs. So one thing we learned from Illinois is, great, you want more minorities to be involved and to have access to cannabis licenses, but the social equity programs allow venture capitalists to come in and be major stakeholders and shareholders in minority-owned cannabis businesses. Again, so how are you then protecting people who have been victimized by the criminal justice system for possession of cannabis over the last several decades? And then you're finding a way to monetize it so corporate boards of directors and individuals who won't have anything on their background, who are going to benefit from the financial, from the revenue generated by this industry. So I am in support of the legalization of cannabis so long as it answers all of those components. Vertical integration. Where is the money going? What do social equity programs look like? And again, how are we taking care of the individuals who have been criminalized previously for possession of cannabis or the intent to distribute?
Very thorough. Okay. I really I like the way you had communicated the issue breakdown on that, especially the part about having a defined pathway for the expenditure that we'll be using that revenue on. And so I really like that. It's about as close to earmarking as you could get with the government. And I think one of the concerns, even with that, is that there's it tends to be a distrust among voters that, when the government says, hey, we're going to do this and to raise money and we're going to spend it on that. And I think, historically, we found that, in certain areas it happens, but in a lot of areas it doesn't happen the way that voters expect for it to happen based on, the presentation of the information. And so that's definitely something that resonates with me. Obviously, the social justice piece resonates. You open my eyes to a couple things, especially on the vertical integration piece. So speaking of that,
and I think, to your point, we think a lot about, at least, there's lots of movies and that talks about the fun parts of, cannabis culture. But the reality of it is this is still a business. This is a pharmaceutical business. And so we would never open the door for like opioids in this way. We would never open the door without any expectations for any other drug. And so, I say all that to say, we can't just allow people to, sell us something and then not ask questions like how, the corporate boards of directors, the people who are making decisions about this, who are clearly making money and revenue off of it, how is that then going back into marginalized communities?
Okay. Well, let's talk about it, because vertical integration is an issue when we're talking about new industry, right? And let's talk about our supporting our small local businesses, which is, for us, the key to creating jobs. So let's see what your thoughts are on it.
So I think that it's really important that a dollar generated circulate in our community as many times as it possibly can before it leaves our community going somewhere else. I also believe that our small local businesses here in Shelby County, and I'm specifically speaking of businesses that have 250 and fewer employees. So that's like schools or small businesses. There are other entities that would apply to, but Memphis, because we are a tourist destination that they need and the loans and grants and support that they need to continue to thrive. Because again, we had economic downturn, in 2008. There are still businesses that, that did not reopen after that. And so to, figure out how to navigate this pandemic, we have to make sure that small business owners, particularly businesses owned by women, businesses owned by people of color, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color, that those businesses are taken care of. Because when you look at, the broader picture, women and individuals who are people of color tend not to have the same support and financial resources. And so we want to make sure that as we talk about like the Green New Deal, infrastructure building, the legalization of cannabis, all of these, which are potentially revenue generating sources that are going to be regulated by government, how can small business owners be competitive in their state contract process, in the RFP process? Again, until we start to make sure that these steady revenue streams are flowing into small local businesses, we can't keep having corporate bailouts. Like, we can't keep bailing out big organizations, big entities that, they might maintain a corporate space here in our city or county. When tax incentives end, they're gone, moving on to the next city. We have to take care of the people who love to live, work, and play here and keep our dollars circulating.
Amen to that. Well, it's time for our last question and our really big question. And I asked this question of everyone who comes on Coffee Candidates in Conversation. And that is the SWOT analysis. I'd like for you to look at District 97, your legislators hat on, and tell us whether you see as the greatest strength, the greatest weakness, the biggest opportunity, and the biggest threat to District 97 moving from where it is today to where it can be tomorrow.
So our greatest, the people. I've had an opportunity to connect with thousands of people virtually, for sure. And like, I've been at the polls, this will be day 8. Socially distance and also connect with voters to understand their issues. And I still firmly believe that our greatest strength is the people, our ideas, our passion, our zest. When I drive around the district, I see how proud people are to take care of their lawns, to support their neighbors, to support our schools and our students. And so definitely it's our people. I would say a weakness is that, if we don't stay in community with one another and we see our neighbors, our colleagues as a threat, then that is actually an area where, we could potentially stumble as a district. District 97 is a more affluent district when we are compared to, say, some of the districts that are adjacent to us. And so, we have to do a good job of continuing to care one another. Senator Coley, who is the incumbent, who is not seeking, he was passed legislation around, keeping women and children safe. And so if we don't continue that could become a weakness for us. We have to continue to take care of one another. I think a huge opportunity is, of course, the option to elect new, fresh leadership. I'm running in part because I see myself in neighbors. I see families trying to figure out, how to entertain their children so that you're not indoors during this pandemic. And so I think that we have just an incredible opportunity to new that is going to continue to lead our district in a way that's innovative and transformative, because we are a vanguard district. District 97 has launched a number of transformative public servants who, like Trey Hargett, our current Secretary of State, he served. He was a state rep in 97 when he started his career. And so our district continues to be filled with lots of talented, outstanding leaders. And so I believe that we have an opportunity to select strong leadership that is reflective of our district. And finally, I would say the greatest threat right now to our district is that, we can't afford to just be pleased with all the good things that are happening. Rather, we have to continue to move forward. Progress is not locked in. That means that and I'm seeing this in our municipal leadership. When I read through their budgets and all of the documents, the minutes, particularly for like Bartlett and some of the other verbs that are in my district, I see 4, 5, 10-year plans, record numbers of census completion rates. And so I believe that if we dial that back in any way, that will pose a very real threat to our district, because again, cessation rate, federal funding for the next 10 years. And so I think that if we dial anything back, that'll be a threat to our district. But we also have an opportunity to model what does it look like to go from good to great and great to transformative, and to continue to be a support to, of course, the adjacent districts whose affluence and communities are, facing some real challenges.
I think we may have stumbled across a bad spot in our connection. Can you hear me? We'll give Miss Ruby Powell-Dennis a moment to reconnect. She's coming back online now.
Hey, can you see me? I'm not sure what happened.
She's back. She's back. Well, we waited on you. And so, but you were sharing with us that the biggest threat is, that if you dial it back any as it relates to being forward moving, that it could really slow you down. And,
Yes.
and so I think you have really done a great job laying out all of these different perspectives and sharing really good information with voters. And so, at this point, I'm going to share a word or two with those who are watching, and then we'll give you the opportunity to give the last word and tell voters why you deserve their vote. Fair?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. So if you're watching this, understand that everyone can make a difference, and one vote can be the difference. As residents of Shelby County in the city of Memphis, we have a responsibility, an obligation, a civic duty to elect leaders that will do the right thing under pressure every time. We need leaders who will be responsive to our needs. We need leaders that will engage us and help restore the trust in government. So you've got to get out to vote to make that happen. That comes from accountability. We have to hold leaders accountable. But to hold leaders accountable, we must ourselves act with a sense of responsibility. So let's be accountable for exercising our voice, which is our vote. On top of that, I want to give you an update, or really more of a reminder. July 30th is quickly approaching. Today is July 25th. The last day to have your request for an absentee ballot in hand at the election commission is the 30th. That means you can't send it on the 30th if you want to be able to vote by absentee ballot. It has to be in the hands of the election commission by the 30th. So make sure that you request a ballot now if you plan to vote by absentee ballot. But understand this: if you have requested an absentee ballot and for any reason you decide to go to the polls and vote, you'll be able to vote, but it will be on a provisional ballot and your vote may or may not be counted. So if you don't have your absentee ballot yet and you've already requested it, call, email, and get that ballot so that you can vote by absentee ballot. Lastly, I want to say that we have to have another responsibility that's huge. We have to make sure we participate in the census, because our participation ensures that our district lines are drawn fairly, and to make sure, or it ensures rather, that all of the dollars that should come to Tennessee from our federal government and actually make it to Shelby County gets here, because our communities need those resources so that we can continue to move forward. So everybody, let's come to our census and take the census, okay? So let's make that happen. And now we're going to turn it back over to Miss Ruby Powell-Dennis. And before doing so, I want you to know that you can find out information about Miss Dennis and her platform at her website, which is www.rubypowelldennis.com. And you can also check her out on Facebook, and it's facebook.com/rpowelldennis97. You can find her on Twitter, twitter.com/r_Powell-Dennis97. I left the 97 off on that one, or is that right? Did I get it right on that one, or is it wrong?
It's only one R Powell-Dennis 97.
Okay,
all platforms.
Yeah. Okay. And then on LinkedIn, it's linkedin.com/Ruby Powell-Dennis. Just rewind the video if it went by too fast. And so now, Miss Ruby Powell-Dennis, close us out.
So I have experience working with multi-million-dollar budgets, I have extensive management experience. Some of my largest teams have had 25 people who were direct reports. So I've managed really big teams, people across lines of difference on age, ethnicity, sexual orientation, what part of town, whether they grew up in Memphis or grew up somewhere else. I am used to working with lots of different people. My campaign staff is very diverse, a lot of women. So I'll cop to that, because I believe that women have a place, and there's a need for us, more of us in electoral politics. So I won't apologize for that. But I do believe that you need to build diverse coalitions, and I have already done that. And just, the last 6 months, we have not scaled back in any way, because I believe that you deserve leadership that works full time during a pandemic, that works full time when things are going well, and it works full time when things are not in our favor and it's hard. So I believe that I deserve your vote, because I will be committed to your work, committed to the issues that you care about. And if I can't address it right away, I'll own that. We're currently running a text message program that allows me as a candidate to intimately converse with folks right on their phone. We intend to keep that service until we can no longer have it, until something better comes along. So that way, a constituent who's received a text message from me, because I send those text messages, not someone else, I send them and I reply. You can always converse with me. So if an issue comes up, go ahead and reply to the text message you've received from me. I want to hear about it, because again, it's a 21st century. We have technology that will allow us to safely interact with our constituents. And so I am asking for your vote, because the connection you're experiencing with me now, my social media, my presence, it won't go away once elected. You'll always be able to get in touch with me. You'll always be able to find me. And there will always be a standing invitation for any group, community leader, to come and join me in Nashville, so that we can lobby on the Hill to get that legislation we just talked about that's so vital passed. Because I am just one person, but together we are stronger.
Okay. And thank you so much again for joining us for Coffee, Candidates, and Conversation. And thank you, Ms. Ruby Powell-Dennis. Good luck to you on your race. And I'm sure we'll be seeing more great things from you.
Yes, thank you. Stay safe, and I'll talk to you soon.
Likewise.